Hello, this is Changing the Face of Yoga, and I have a really exciting interview for you today. I'm going to be interviewing Kristen Krash, who is in a very small town in Ecuador. How exciting is that, huh? And we're going to talk about really literally changing the face of yoga because Kristen has some very well thought out opinions about yoga of today and what yoga could be. Kristen has been doing yoga for 16 years. She's been a teacher for much of that. And she was in both the Ashtanga and Iyengar traditions. And about 2 years ago, she left that life and is now in Ecuador building a farm that promotes sustainable environmental practices. And I'd like to go from her 15 years as a teacher to what made her change her mind to what her life is now. And I think she'll say that yoga is a part of all of that. So yoga doesn't have one face, it has many. So welcome, Kristen. I'm so glad that we could work this out. I know this isn't as easy for you as it might be for people that have access to an internet at home, but I really thank you for making this effort to come on.
Sure.
And would there be anything else you'd like to add to your introduction?
No, I think that you covered most of it. And I think anything else I need to add will probably come out over the course of the interview.
Okay, great. Let's just start at the beginning. What was your life like when you were teaching yoga?
I would have to say the first 7 or 8 years, I just absolutely adored it. I mean, I had so much energy to teach, and I just really loved it. I just felt like I had found something that perfectly reflected something that had really, really, really not just helped me, but probably saved my life. I mean, before I became a yoga teacher, I had many, many various jobs in various industries, some illegal, some not, some borderline illegal. I mean, I was really kind of like in the gutter looking at the stars, to quote Oscar Wilde, for most of my life. When I found yoga, or it found me, or it pinpointed me, it sort of, pushed me into my body in a way that almost, I hate to use the word force, but it did. I mean, it sort of forcibly made me begin to make choices of life over death. And there's no other way to make it seem less dramatic than that. It was truly like at that point, I was at a tipping point between going on and not going on. So it was a way for me to become a channel, become a transmitter of this practice, this magic, this embodiment to other people. And I just absolutely, absolutely loved it. And the things that happened over the course of the years that made me love it less, a lot of them were just purely circumstantial. I mean, I was living in a city where the cost of living tripled. And of course, my income didn't, you know what I mean? So I went literally just financially, from swimming to treading water, to feel like I was drowning, no matter how many classes a week I taught, or how many teacher trainings I hopped onto, or how many private clients I had. It just became untenable as a way to make a living. Whereas when I started, because I guess there were fewer studios, you could make more money. The cost of living wasn't as high. It was just it was a tenable way to make a living, and it became an untenable way to make a living. So some of the exhaustion that I felt was just purely circumstantial. It wasn't completely about like, oh, yoga sucks now. You know what I mean? It was a little bit of a combination, like the exhaustion, that I was feeling. So about 3 or 4 years ago, I just got to the point where I turned 40. And I think, I don't know if this is true for everyone, but I find that a lot of my friends are still in their 30s. And I think that for many people, your 30s are a time that you're really about yourself. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's like a time where you're sort of like fanatically trying to figure out like who you are and what you're about and define yourself. And you know, when I hit 40, I mean, my perspectives just started to change. It was kind of like, okay, I've saved my soul. What now? Because I can't just keep, if I gaze into my own navel any longer, I'm just going to fall in. Like there's got to be something outside this like search for myself that I can take all this discipline that I've channeled, all this good work that I've done, and take it to something that's like outside myself. And so I think it was also just a factor of just growing older and maturing and just being having my eyes opened to the world around me and thinking, okay, so what can I do now? Like what now? What's next?
What's next?
Exactly. So I had met my partner that I'm with now, Juan, and he had told me he was going back to Ecuador. He's originally from Ecuador, but he lived in the States for about 15, 16 years. And then I kind of found out he'd been talking about going back to Ecuador for like 7 or 8 years. But then I said, as we got closer and our relationship got closer, I said, you know, I would really like to go live somewhere else and do something else. And we were both very interested in ecology and sustainability. And, you know, he's a builder and I was really big into urban gardening and part of the urban gardening movement in DC. And so that's how we decided to do this sustainable living community. I mean, it you know, the vision has definitely matured and grown over the last years. We've been actually doing it. But we came up with this idea and then we just like really went for it. I mean, we went all in. I mean, we found land in Ecuador and we didn't have anywhere to live. We lived in a tent for 5 months until we built our first house. I mean, so that's
commitment. That's really commitment.
So,
yes.
yeah. So, you know, I mean, I definitely don't practice as much asana as I once did, but I don't really think that's a problem because I was probably between demonstrating, teaching, taking classes, and my own practice, I was like in and out of yoga asanas like 6 to 8 hours a day every day. So I don't really think that's an issue. You know, it's much better for my body not to be doing all these positions all the time and to just work, you know, just push the wheelbarrow, shovel the rocks, dig the dirt, like chase after the horse. You know, I mean, I get plenty of physical movement, just living my life, and I can allow my yoga to be things like cultivating my attention span to read books that I haven't read for you know, forever. Like I can't remember the last time I actually opened a book and read the entire thing from beginning to end because I just didn't have the attention span. I didn't have the wherewithal to really, you know, so now my yoga is much more about focus. It's much more about, okay, I'm going to earth plaster this wall. It's going to take me 2 weeks. It's a multi-step process. It's going to require patience. It's going to require me to do everything step by step and methodically and not force it. And so now my yoga is really about my life and channeling, like I said, all that focus and all that discipline into things that I make instead of putting other people in positions, which I think is a great thing to do. But I was done with that. So that's what was next. And so that's what I moved on to. So I don't think in any way I'm not doing yoga, you know, and sometimes I stand on my head and I stretch my legs and I do positions to open my shoulders back up after a hard day. But it's like, it's not the end all be all of life anymore. And I feel much better for it.
Kristen made a post in Facebook. You have time or can, I suggest you read it. It's extremely well written. And she goes through why she has transitioned from doing 6 to 8 hours of yoga a day to just living yoga, to taking the other parts of yoga and adding them to her life. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that post because I thought it was quite extraordinary. You talk about how yoga has changed. You just talked about how it was difficult at the end to make a living from yoga because of the changes. But there are also some other changes, which was there's a lot of yoga teachers now, and there is a
Right.
corporate vision, shall we say, that yoga has, at least for some in some areas, and also a lot of bad press from our, I'll put them in quotes, gurus, and that has changed yoga. And how did you interpret that when, because you had devoted your life basically to yoga for a long time and a lot of hours. I'm very impressed with that. My body would have fallen apart at 6 to 8 hours of yoga a day after a week, I'm pretty sure. So how are you looking at that? How are you putting that into your consciousness? Because it's been a bit shocking in some ways.
It's easy to get really cynical, and it's easy to get where you're just looking around and you see the yoga with goats and yoga with beer and yoga with stripper poles, and you're just kind of like, I mean, and I've said, I'm not making these things up. I mean, these things exist. I mean, I've seen literally stripper poles in the windows of Lululemon stores, because now women do these pole dancing classes and they do the yoga. So they're both really trendy, and they want to, put the pole dancing with the yoga, and and it's just like a lot of like, oh my, like what is going on? Like what is this? And so, it's easy to just be sort of like, oh man, it's just all going to hell in a handbasket. And maybe it is. I mean, my post, I mean, it's actually the name of an album by some underground musician that I really admire, Mike Gunter and his Restless Souls. And it's called Burn It Down for the Nails. And that phrase, burn it down for the nails, it really like struck me in terms of what I really think I would really like to see happen to all this yoga crap. And it also mirrors a Rumi poem that I just used to read all the time in the early days of my practice, called The Pickaxe, where, if you say burn it down for the nails, you're not just saying burn it down and stopping there. You're saying burn it down for the nails, which to me means like rip it apart for the parts that are good. Like take it down for the parts that are still mean something. Take it down for the parts that you can maybe build something else with, that you can recycle, that you can repurpose, that there's still something good in there. Those nails, the things that pierced us in the very beginning, those moments of sensation where you feel yourself coming alive in some way that you haven't been in years. And those nails are also the things that hold you together. So it's like first they cut and then they integrate. And the Rumi poem that I'm alluding to is very similar in that way. It's called The Pickaxe. And Rumi says, take the pickaxe, tear the house down, because you don't own it anyway. It's just a lot of stuff that you've built up and collected, and basically just like a bunch of stuff. But if you tear all that down and you get down to the ground, the last line of the poem says, you'll see two glints in the dirt. That there's some gold in there. There's some treasure in there. And so, that's really what I was saying in this post, was that it's not to be negative. It's not to say just like rip it up, tear it down, it's no good, it all sucks, but that it's how to get back to the essence of it, how to get back to where you can feel, where you have the space to feel something in a yoga practice. And I don't think there is a lot of space to feel the things, the sensations that move you into a more wholly alive, more conscious, more responsible for your actions place if you're doing yoga on a goat while drinking beer around a stripper pole. I mean, I just don't. That's where like the spectacle that yoga has become I think is blocking a lot of people from the gift of what it has. So now another thing I wrote about in my post is like, it's like all about the hard class, like the hard class, the gymnastic maneuvers, the yoga, acro yoga, and all this. And I mean, I come from Ashtanga and Iyengar, like probably the two hardest yoga methods out there. So I'm not saying it's not hard. I'm not saying it can't be and isn't physically challenging. But, I would say to my younger students who were really into the like sort of the gymnastics of it, like, if you're in this for gymnastics, I mean, we all are really lousy at it, because any like amateur level collegiate gymnast in some like Midwest gymnastics school can kick all of our asses. I mean, it's like, show me your iron cross double back layout and stick the landing or go home. I mean, we're not gymnasts. Doing a 15-second handstand does not make you a gymnast. So it's like, so everybody settle down, stop trying to be gymnastics, and let's like figure out what else is here, like what else is here for us. If you're just doing this because you think it's hard, I mean, and to put it in a whole other perspective, I mean, right now there's women in Syria carrying 200 pounds of all their belongings on their backs with their babies, desperately trying to get to some refugee camp somewhere. I mean, that's hard. That's hard. Being in like a nice, heated, clean room with a bamboo floor with like your $8 smoothie, I mean, that's really not hard. Yoga has been and has always been somewhat of a leisure activity of the aristocracy. I mean, that's its history. I don't think Indian peasants back in Vedic India were doing yoga. It was always something of the Brahmin culture. It's not a thing of popular culture, and it definitely has not been a thing for people who are impoverished. I mean, that's unfortunate, but that is its history. So let's accept that. You know what I mean? It's like, you're not really doing something hard. Like, yes. You just paid $8 for a bottle of water with a cucumber floating in it. I mean, relax. So, so those are some of the things that were really kind of getting to me in the yoga world, and the things I'm really glad to have been able to step away from. But at the same time, my heart aches in a way to communicate that to my friends, my fellow teachers, that I still believe that there are these moments, like it's all I can call them is moments, where you are in a position, you're breathing, your body sends some signal to your mind signals your body, where you do feel for a moment like as an integrated, sane human being, something in you shines out. Right. And it's so, how can we, through all this, like just this shellac, this varnish, this like coating of nail polish that's covering the yoga world right now, the corporate yoga world, like how can we scrape that off and get back to the places where, and I don't want to sound, I want to say get back, because I don't want to sound reactionary. I don't want to say like, oh, the past in yoga was so great, because now is coming out, there was sexual abuse, there was, all this culty activity, there was all this other stuff. So I don't want to like sound like reactionary, and I want to say get back. So it's kind of like more like, how can we move on and keep that essence that brings us, like the real, like that brings the that keeps the dedicated practitioners practicing. How can we keep transmitting that essence? So I just gave a few examples of things that I think are in the way of like Yoga Alliance. I mean, it's just an example. It's not one thing. I mean, but keeping up this facade that Yoga Alliance is anything is a way that contributes to this sort of like corporate veneer of yoga. I advise people, like, don't go to so many classes. And I'm not trying to like hurt my friends who own studios, because when I taught in yoga studios back in the late 90s, there were an early 2000s, or I would go into class in the late 90s and I was teaching by the early 2000s. There were so many fewer studios, but they were doing well. So I don't think that if there's a shrinking of yoga that like that everybody's just going to shut down and go bankrupt. I think that right now the market is just so oversaturated. It's just so ridiculously oversaturated and competitive. I think that if people do stop going to so many classes, I think that the studios that really cultivate the dedicated followings with good teachers will remain and will thrive. At the end, like I just wanted to not just sound like, just like I said, like an armchair anarchist, like just burn it down. But what can we actually, like, if you're still in the trenches, as I like to say it, as a yoga teacher, like what can you do? What can you do to advocate like getting back to the essence of the practice? I think encouraging your students to practice at home and show them how to practice at home, and say just start with one position, because one will become two and two will become three, and listen to, just go with how your body wants to progress in its own way. Really, I mean, that's for the advice I would give them. Say, I can't practice at home. How do I practice at home? And I would say, just do one position. Just pick one. Just do it, and then come back and tell me tomorrow how long you ended up being on your yoga mat. And people would come back to me and, you know what, I was there for half an hour. I was there for an hour, because once I did that one position, I felt what I needed, like that I wanted to do more. And I do think it's in the solitude. It's in like the solitude of it doesn't have to be at home. I mean, a lot of people are on the go, or they're living in group houses. I mean, you don't need a yoga altar in your house to have a home practice. I mean, it can be anywhere. It can be in your office. It could be at the gym. I mean, but, wherever you are, just go into a corner by yourself and turn off the freaking Instagram camera and do some positions, sit quietly and see what happens. Because I think that's when the nails, that's where you find the nails. That's when you find those glints in the dirt. That's where you find the value that's there. So that's pretty much what the post was about.
Let me just make sure I understand, is that yes, there's much to value in yoga, but it is very individualized, isn't it? And you have to find it on your own.
Right. Yeah.
Going to 20 classes a week.
No, you're not going to find your own voice inside if you're listening to 20 other voices a week.
Never.
I mean, there, don't get me wrong. I mean, there would be times where I would be in a class, because I throughout my whole yoga, that I was teaching and practicing, I usually went to a class about once a week, and that's not very often, you know what I mean, for like a dedicated yoga practitioner. I mean, but I practiced by myself on my own. But I would go to class once a week, and most of the time I went to class when I was in really deep in the Iyengar tradition, it was to get the information. It was to get the asana cueing, and to get that like really hardcore alignment, how to get a step from A to B to C to D to E to F in this very like linear, logical way that the Iyengar people teach, because I found that very useful as a teacher. I found it like kind of like the building blocks of how to make poses. So I went for the information, and there were other times where I would just sometimes, I would pop into a class and I wouldn't be expecting much, and maybe the teacher was younger than I was. The teacher was less experienced than I was. The teacher was just a friend of mine, like whatever, I happened to just have a spare hour. I taught at the same studio, so I could take the class for free, and I would drop in on the class. And sometimes, these teachers would drop a little gem, just, and I would be there, and I'd be like, okay, that was worth my hour or my hour and a half, like right there. So I'm not saying there's nothing to be found in yoga classes. I mean, I think there's obviously this great information, and I think sometimes there are moments where like the teacher will hit a nail in your own soul with their words, because I remember those times. I remember every single time a teacher said something sometimes even offhand, like in between asana cueing, a teacher might come up with some comment that just was like a ding, you know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
you find those moments in classes. Classes are valuable. So I didn't say don't go to class. I said
Mm-hmm.
don't go to
Yep.
so many classes that it drowns. There's so much noise that it drowns out the opportunity for those little dings to echo in your heart and in your soul.
I was with some yoga people, and I was always surprised that they were going to this type of class, and then they were going to that type of class, and they were going to this type of class. And I always thought, how do you really find the yoga, find the way you want to do yoga if you're constantly experimenting with all these different kinds of yoga? I think you have to do that at the beginning to find the kind that really resonates with you. But I've often wondered about that, and I wonder if that's really helpful if you're doing Ashtanga, and then you go to
Right,
Iyengar, then you do
Jivamukti and
Satyananga, and
Nusara.
then
I
you
mean,
do
it's just,
I
and then
don't know if
there's
I'm
just all
saying
these other
Shiva
things,
Mukti
like
or something like
smaller
that.
things in between, because
Yeah,
so many teachers want to, like, quote
yeah,
unquote, like find a niche and like market themselves as something unique. There's yoga for runners, there's yoga for boxers, there's yoga for everybody. And,
yeah.
it's just, and it turns into a real, and people have, whatever, like lotus heart yoga. I mean, there's just so much. And it's just kind of like, you don't even know. I don't think it's helpful. I really don't. I mean, I had got into it with
Yeah.
someone I met recently, and they were, good Lord. I mean, when somebody starts quoting Elizabeth Gilbert at me, I'm like, I have to go. Like, I just really need to crawl under this table right now. Like, I just, so she saw some like Elizabeth Gilbert TED talk or YouTube video or something where she talks about being a hummingbird, that some people are woodpeckers and some people are hummingbirds, Okay, like I'm clearly a woodpecker. I mean, I did the same damn thing for 16 years. Okay, I banged my head into that tree for a
Ah.
long time. But some people are hummingbirds. They're just meant to flutter around and hover, and that's okay. And I'm like, there used to be a word for this, and it was dilettante. So yes, you do need to explore different areas, but at some point you're going to have to stick with something to learn anything. I don't think humans work as hummingbirds. It's not my job. It's not my job to pollinate flowers. So I
Yeah.
don't understand the analogy anyway. But no, so I don't think I think that there is, you gotta stick with something for a while. I think one thing about that post, I mean, I'm looking back at it now. I'm back on Facebook, and it had, and I'm not a public figure on Facebook. I'm just a regular person with like 1,000 Facebook friends in different areas. Mostly I post about what I'm doing now, about my sustainable living project.
Mm-hmm.
So for this, I mean, 204 reactions and 41 shares. So it did stir up quite a few pots for whatever reason. I think one of the things that really, I hope resonated with people was the imagery, because I was injecting a lot of imagery into that writing as I was writing it, of things that really transformed me. So I maybe some of that came across. The kindest comment I read on that post, the one that really went straight to my heart, was a woman wrote on a shared post. She said, "I'm laughing and crying and pumping my fists." And I cried when I read that. I really did. Like, I'm almost crying now, just repeating it, because that was exactly what I was going for, was this very yeah, kind of feeling, like not this, oh no, yoga sucks, but more of like a, yeah, like, okay, like what's next, But one of the images that I'm not sure how many people caught it. Picasso said, like, what is he said?
Mm-hmm.
Bad artists borrow, but good artists steal. So when I write, I blatantly steal from other writers. I don't even hide it. But so people who are well read can generally find stuff in my writing that's just kind of like, oh yeah, I know where she got that. But I say there was a time in the early years of my practice where I really felt like I was losing my mind. I mean, just really losing my mind. All these repressed memories of my childhood, of past things were coming up, and I didn't have any psychological help. I didn't have any framework to put them in. I didn't know what was happening to me. I was at the time I was practicing Ashtanga and like more fast-paced vinyasa classes. So my own internal pot was being stirred, and I didn't. It was just boiling over, and I didn't have any way to actually see what was going on. When I went and I sort of made myself go to the Iyengar people because I knew they had this reputation for making you stay in poses. And I knew it was going to be difficult for me. And it seemed very stolid and very boring. And they wore these like nerdy diaper shorts. And I was just like terrified of the whole thing, you know? But I made myself go. And of course, they give me the whole like, harangue when I go in there. They're like, oh, I don't care that you've been doing Ashtanga for 5 years. You can't do any advanced practices here. And I said, you know what? I said, and the guy was a teacher. And I said, what, you're about to teach a class, right? And he said, yes, I am. And I said, and I'm looking at the schedule and it's level 1. And he said, yes. And I said, well, can I come to this class, please? You know, and he was like, you know, and then he settled down and he was like, okay, you know, she understands she has to start over. And when I went into those classes and I was really just made to be still, like to stand there in mountain pose for 8 minutes, pressing my thigh bones back and lifting my kneecaps and all those things that, you know, they want you to do. It felt like I was able to stir the pot and then let the sediment start to settle so I could actually see what was there. It was a very different feeling from how I felt after coming out of an Ashtanga practice or a fast-paced vinyasa practice where I really just felt agitated and I didn't have any way to ground that agitation and actually see why I was agitated. So being sort of made to be still while my body was occupied doing things, because meditation at that time wasn't happening for me. I mean, there was no way. If I actually tried to sit there with myself, like, no, I mean, I was just going straight to a very bad place. So the Iyengar positions were those long holds in those positions while you're being cued to do all these microscopic things with your body. Gave my mind enough to do on the surface where below the surface it could start to sift through things. I'm a big like hard rock and heavy metal fan, and there's a very powerful music video to Metallica's song "The Unforgiven." It was back in like the 90s and or late 80s, early 90s, and in this music video, there's a young boy. He's in a dark house and he's like scratching at the wall. He's just trying to dig a hole through this wall. And as the video goes on and the song goes on, he turns into a young man and he becomes a middle-aged man, and the wall is starting to get cracks in it, and he's starting to break through this wall. And by the end of the video, he's an old man. He's shriveled. He's weak. He's trying to climb up because the light has just started to come through this wall. And he breaks a hole in the wall. He's climbing up. He's trying to get through this hole in the wall, but he's exhausted. He's weak. He's old. He's done. He falls back and he's dying. And in the moment this man is dying, his hand opens, and what falls out is the key. And the hole that he's been digging the whole time is above the door. And it's like, I mean, you're just kind of like, whoa, and that's one of the images that I bring up in my post, that I felt like I was, scratching at the wall with the key to a door. And that what the Iyengar practice particularly, but yoga overall ended up doing for me was showing me that I held the key and that I could open the door. It's so special to me. It's so radical to me that I really, if there's any way that I can maintain some voice, even if it's with Facebook posts or podcast interviews, I still want to share that with people. So I haven't renounced yoga in any way. It's just I needed to move on from that sort of like corporate veneered world and repurpose the nails. So now what I'm doing here in Ecuador is, I am teaching yoga when people come here. I am encouraging my teacher friends to bring nature retreats. I mean, we're not really going to be a yoga resort. We're more of a nature lodge for people to bring yoga retreats to us for a very different experience, an experience that's in nature, an experience that maybe instead of doing 2 yoga classes a day, 2 asana classes a day, you do 1, and then we plant trees, or we go out into nature, we find clay, we find pigments, we find seeds and stones, and we make things, or we do some work. I mean, we build something. So I'm not giving up on yoga because it was such a radical, special thing for me, and I still believe in it. That's one thing I want to come out of that post, is that there's still a very there's an optimism in how I feel about it overall. Even with all the crap, I still feel that optimism, that there's space for people to figure out that they actually are holding the key to the door. Another one of the images I use is that the popular movie The Shawshank Redemption, where which came from a book by Stephen King, and one of the last lines of the book is he talks about the escape of the prisoner, of Andy Dufresne, and he said who managed to crawl through a mile of shit and come out clean on the other side. You know what I mean? Like, I think that resonates for a lot of people. Like, what you have to do
Yes.
as you mature in your practice, and as you dedicate to your practices, you're sifting through your own shit, and you're hoping maybe not to come out clean, because clean is like, but cleaner, cleanish, like cleanish, you know what I mean? Because you're never going to be like 8 years old again. I mean, you're not going to, your inner child, that's over. Forget it. If you want to talk to me about your inner child, you can go listen to Elizabeth Gilbert on YouTube. I don't have time for that.
No.
So it's like,
I will say I found the post to be optimistic. I thought that you had some criticisms of yoga, which in many ways I agree with.
I think most people got it. It's just when you're reading through comments on anything, it's like the people who don't get it are the ones that you're like, well, what else do I need to say? You know what I mean? It's like anything else. It's like if you own a restaurant and you get like 55-star reviews and like 1 2-star review, you're obsessed over the 2-star review. I mean, I think most people got that optimism. They got that more like that fist pumping, laughing and crying, response. But I just want to be very clear, since I have the opportunity to vocalize that I am positive, I am optimistic, I am still a yogi. I mean, I haven't renounced or given up on it. It's just simply changed for me in a very healthy way, in a way that I'm like I said, I'm not repressed, I'm not tired, I'm not exhausted. I can actually live out this radical reality that I'm creating here for myself, and for hopefully for other people. This year we finished out our first guest house. So we're starting to get more visitors. We have 4 people staying with us right now, and we're starting to pick up momentum and starting to offer more events. So I'm looking forward to sharing my new vision of yoga with more people. We actually have our own ground spring. The source is only about a kilometer away from our property, and it's in a like a protected area. So we're very, very fortunate to have a protected water source right on our lands that's clean. We can swim in. It's just beautiful. It's a lot of hard work doing what we're doing. I mean, it's a lot of gritty hard work. I mean, I have like, my clothes have to be separated into my work clothes and my non-working clothes, which are basically just my pajamas, because otherwise everything just gets muddy and starts to stink. I mean, it's really like, we're really in it. So, but it's every day, it's worth it. I mean, every day when you go from basically just having like some holes in the ground where you've dug your foundations, to then your foundations, to the support beams of your house going up to the roof. I mean, it's like, every day is worth it.
I looked at the pictures on the website, and I want to swim in that little pool. I thought, oh, that looks wonderful. I love that.
The lagoon. Absolutely. So we are on a 8-acre property in tropical cloud forest area of Ecuador, not very far from Quito. So we're only 2.5 hour drive from the Quito airport, which is where most people land when they fly into Ecuador. We chose the locations. One of the reasons we chose it is for its amazing biological diversity. Cloud forest in general is one of the it's the most biodiverse ecosystem in all ecosystems, actually, even more so than rainforest. We have more species per square inch, per square centimeter than any other ecosystem existing. So it's very lush, it's very tropical, it's very paradise looking. People come, they usually say it looks like either like Jurassic Park or like the prehistoric exhibit at Epcot. We have the huge ferns and the big leaves and lots of butterflies and birds, and it's very exotic looking insects, and it's really wonderful. And one thing that always really turned me off, being a full-time yoga teacher and not really starving, but was never going to make $1 million doing it, was the inaccessibility of a lot of yoga retreats cost-wise. And not simply the exorbitant tuitions and the sort of, that they really turned into. Actually, a good friend of mine, she's very honest. She calls what she does a yoga vacation. And I'm like, that's great. At least you're honest. You're not calling it a retreat, because a retreat to me is more of like a stepping back. So she calls them yoga vacations, and they're in, very high-end resorts, and they're very expensive, but she's honest about what it is. But the price point, and not just the price point, but the fact that to get to many of these resorts, say it's in Costa Rica or say it's in Nicaragua, it's a whole nother flight from wherever it is that you land. So you have to travel basically for 2 days to get there. And you look at the flight to the country, okay, from DC to Costa Rica or DC to Nicaragua or wherever it is in Mexico or wherever it is, and then you see, and then there has to be a connecting flight to somewhere else, and then you need a chartered car to take you to the resort itself. So it ends up being $1,500 or however much just to get there, on top of the $3,000 tuition. So I was adamant about finding a place that if people wanted to, they could find a cheap flight, round trip flight to Quito, and they could take a bus to our land that would not take longer than 3 hours. So if you want to do it in one day, you can.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be very expensive. So we're not that far from Quito, although we're in a completely different environment from a city. We're pretty. I would say we're remote, because I can take the bus out to the little town where I am now any day that I want. There's an 8 a.m. bus, and so if you need to, and we have a car. If you need to get somewhere, you can. You don't have to be airlifted out. You don't have to take a helicopter in. But we're in an extremely tranquil and peaceful and like pretty isolated feeling place. We're in a little valley. We're just nestled in by these giant palm trees, and we've planted about 55 fruit trees so far. And then with all of the natural vegetation around, you really feel very nourished and very comforted by all this just nature just exploding around you. We have our own spring, and at this point we have built out a really lovely community kitchen area with 2 stories. Another structure that we're using as a guest house. We have rooms and beds at this point, so no one has to camp. We can fully accommodate people. We have a shower. We have a nice bathroom that we made completely out of recycled and repurposed materials. It's really cool, actually. It's all like glass bottles and plastic bottles, and it's a really cool little structure. Our bathroom, surplus roofing materials, scrap wood. I love our little bathroom, and we compost, we collect, we mulch, we do all the permaculture, sustainability stuff. We have a great garden. I have squash growing, sweet potatoes, yucca, bananas, plantains, lemons and limes. A lot of our staples we're able to grow. We have a friend up the road who has a farm. He's had his farm for much longer, so all of his, he's producing a lot more fruits than we are. at the moment. So he brings us on his mule about once every other week, like a whole load of stuff. It's like I call it our CSA. We have like our own CSA, but it's like the guy up the road on his donkey. And he shows up with like 140 bananas, and I'm like, what am I going to do with? Yeah, what am I going to do with this? We really enjoy our lives. I make wines now. I make my own wine out of passion fruit and pineapple and oranges and different tropical fruits. I pickle vegetables. I can things. I use like the old fashioned hot pack method where you boil the jars like my grandmother. And these are skills that I think there would really be an appreciation for. So when people come, they can also not just eat really good tasting organic, like sustainably grown food, but they can see how it can be preserved. You can make wine out of it. Our next step is actually we're going to move into artisanal cacao production. Ecuador has some of the best cocoa beans in the world. Actually, some people say Ecuador has the best cocoa beans in the world. That's our next step, is to begin to cultivate some of this very sought after heirloom variety cocoa beans, and perhaps even make some chocolate of our own someday. So our goal is to be sustainable. Our goal is to be able to live here and not have to leave very often, to not have to get a lot of inputs from the outside, not to have to go to towns to buy things, but to be able to produce a lot of the things we need ourselves. In order to do that, I think to have one way is to offer hospitality, and another way is for us to cultivate something that is. Ecuador as a country is trying very hard to cast off the yoke of imperialism. It's, if you see the graffiti in Quito, it's very explicit. It says Ecuador no es un banana republic. They've come a long way. Their economy is doing very well. We have a lot of immigrants from Colombia, Peru, and Venezuela, because Ecuador is done really well in the last 10 years. And so there's a lot of movement into this country, and it's a very safe place in South America. Doing some sort of cultivation of like a very valued heirloom crop like cacao, and also helping to finish it in a way to actually make something out of it, as opposed to just exporting it. The people in these countries, they grow the valuable crop and it gets sent out for export, and somebody else makes chocolate bars out of it and is a millionaire. And the cocoa bean farmer is not doing so well. So now there's a movement for Ecuadorians and they're doing it, is to make their own chocolate products here in the country, to package them here, to do everything here, to get their organic certification here. So this is something we want to be part of and help to even lead, because me being from the States, my partner having lived in the States for 15 years, we have contacts back in the States to be able to do this. That's another direction that we're going. And it's not only for us to be sustainable financially, but it's also to, like I said, be part of this movement in Ecuador to make Ecuador, farming in Ecuador, more profitable, more sustainable, and a better livelihood. So it would, there's a lot of local initiatives. We're part of our local cooperative. There's meetups for seed exchanges and things like that. And so that's, instead of going to yoga classes, now those are the type of social activities that I like to do. It's like going to like a cocoa bean exchange with my local cooperative with all the farmers, and I mean, it's great, because like where everybody shows up with like those high rubber boots and a machete, and like on a motorcycle. I mean, with a chicken in their bag, I mean, it's just absolutely fantastic. So it's a community. Yeah, it's functioning within a community to make the community better. So I'm really happy with what we're doing here. I'm really proud of it. We have a good online presence. As hard as it is for me to be online, I get out to about twice a week to make sure that I post. And we have 2 horses, and one of the females just gave birth to a new foal. So I put that on Facebook today. So we have a new baby horse. So I try. I'm thinking about hiring a social media person back in the States when I have the money to pay for something like that. But for now, I'm pretty good about keeping our website updated and things online. So I would really like if people would check suenodevida.org and come check us out. And if they're curious, they can come see that every once in a while I still do an arm balance or a handstand. Every once in a while. Yes. Right. Yeah. If you just Google Sueno de Vida, we're actually the first site that comes up, even if you just enter Sueno de Vida in the Google page. So people can find it. Yeah. And we also have a Facebook page. Do need to get back on Instagram. I kind of flaked on Instagram for a while, but I'm going to get back on it. So there's a contact page with our email on the website. So, and I answer email, like I said, 2 to 3 times a week. So,
Okay.
And I love when I get emails from people. So anyone who wants to contact us and set up a small retreat here where we can accommodate 6 to 8 people. So it's more of a small.
So anybody that would like to contact Kristen or look at what she's been doing and her new version of yoga, shall we say, her new version of life with a bit of yoga in it, it's probably truer. Please go on her website. It's just gorgeous, and it's a lovely thing. And I want to congratulate you because it's a hard life. I had something very, very small in comparison to what you did, but I know how it is to start from a piece of land and build something on it. And so I congratulate you on doing so well. It sounds like a really wonderful opportunity. And I think.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristen, for coming on. I think you've really given us some other views about yoga, but also really emphasize the value, that there is value in yoga. Perhaps it's just the costume, shall we say, around it right now that's a bit irritating. Yoga has great value for all of us. It's just how it's presented right now that may be a bit out of sync. And thank you so much. I really enjoyed this discussion.